legendary warship lost to the depths.
If you've never given much thought to what might still be hiding at the bottom of the ocean, you're not alone. Most of the time, shipwrecks stay exactly where they sank, their secrets buried under decades of silt and seawater. But every once in a while, someone gets the chance to crack one open.
A World War II submarine that went down in battle has been found.
Divers have found submarines all over the world from World War I, World War II, and even ones from way before those times. But the moment I heard about this one particular dive, I knew something was terribly wrong. Because this submarine isn't just 118 years old, it's somehow still moving underwater. And whatever's inside might still be alive. Well, let's just say history has a way of surprising us. Which brings us to one particular vault, a lost safe pulled from the wreck of the Andrea Doria. The Andrea Doria was a luxurious Italian ocean liner that met a tragic end on July 25, 1956. It was crossing the Atlantic when it collided with another ship, the Stockholm, off the coast of Nantucket. The Andrea Doria was supposed to be one of the safest ships of its time, but it had some serious stability issues that became painfully obvious after the crash. As water flooded in, the ship started to tilt dangerously, making it nearly impossible to launch lifeboats from one side. Thankfully, most of the passengers were rescued before the ship slipped beneath the waves, but the wreck became one of the most famous underwater sites in the world. Fast forward to 1981, and a team led by underwater explorer Peter Gimble set out to recover something that had been sitting in the wreck for decades: the purser's safe. There had been endless speculation about what could be inside it. Some believed it held millions of dollars in cash and jewels, valuables left behind by wealthy passengers in the chaos of the sinking. With that kind of mystery surrounding it, the safe quickly became one of the most intriguing artifacts still lying in the deep. Getting it back to the surface was no small feat. The expedition cost a staggering $1.75 million and took 35 days to complete. The safe itself was a beast, weighing around 3 tons and sitting at a depth of 240 feet. That meant deep dives, risky work, and a lot of effort to bring it up in one piece. The U.S. Customs officials who opened it found some documents, ship bells, another prized find, were recovered in separate dives. The stern bell was hauled up in the late 1980s, while the bridge bell, a heavy, imposing piece of history, was discovered in 2010 by a pair of determined explorers. Then there was the ship's fine china and glassware, exquisite remnants of the grandeur that once graced the dining rooms. Many pieces have been salvaged over the years, each one a tangible link to a bygone era of luxury travel. The Andrea Doria wasn't the only wreck hiding incredible treasures beneath the waves. If you go back a few thousand years, you'll find the Uluburun shipwreck. The Uluburun shipwreck is one of the most incredible archaeological discoveries ever made. It sank sometime between 1330 and 1300 BCE during the Late Bronze Age. And when it was finally found off the coast of Kars, Turkey, it turned out to be a treasure trove of ancient trade goods. This was not just any old wreck. It was a floating marketplace packed with cargo from all over the Mediterranean, giving historians and archaeologists an unparalleled look into the world of ancient trade and cultural exchange. It all started in 1982 when a local sponge diver named Mehmed Shakir came across what looked like unusual metal objects on the seafloor. It turned out those objects were part of a shipwreck nearly 3,300 years old. That discovery set off an excavation that lasted more than a decade. From 1984 to 1994, researchers from the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, led by George F. Bass and later Samal Pulak, carried out an astonishing 22,413 dives to explore the site. By the time they were done, they had recovered over 17 tons of artifacts. The ship itself was not particularly large. It was about 15 meters long and 5 meters wide, built primarily from Lebanese cedar with oak fixtures. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in cargo. The sheer variety of goods found inside was mind-blowing. There were enormous quantities of copper and tin ingots, which were used to make bronze. These metals were the backbone of Bronze Age civilization, so finding them in such abundance confirmed just how vital trade was during that period. Then there were the luxury goods. The ship was carrying finely carved ivory containers, gold and semi-precious stone jewelry, and colorful Egyptian faience beads. There were also raw materials like elephant tusks and ostrich eggshell beads, along with glass ingots that would have been melted down to create dazzling glassware. The ship's weapons and tools were mostly made of bronze, while its ceramic vessels came from a variety of different cultures, suggesting that its crew had been doing business with people from all over the Mediterranean. One of the most intriguing finds was the golden seal of Queen Nefertiti. That little artifact alone linked the ship to the powerful Egyptian royal court, which meant that its cargo may have included diplomatic gifts or high-value trade goods destined for kings and queens. While the Uluburun shipwreck revealed the riches of ancient trade, not all sunken ships carried treasures of gold and jewels. Some held far darker histories, ones that people tried to erase. Like the Clotilda slave ship. The Clotilda was the last known slave ship to bring kidnapped Africans to the United States, arriving in Mobile Bay, Alabama in 1860. By that time, the international slave trade had been outlawed for over 50 years. But that did not stop some people from trying to make money off human lives. One of those people was Timothy Meir, a wealthy landowner from Mobile, who reportedly made a bet that he could smuggle a group of enslaved Africans into the country without getting caught. To pull off this illegal scheme, he chartered the Clotilda, a fast-moving schooner designed for sneaking past authorities. The ship's journey started in the infamous slave port of Ouidah, in what is now Benin. There, the crew purchased 110 captives for $9,000 in gold. What followed was 6 weeks of unimaginable horror. The captives were crammed into the ship's hold, suffering through brutal conditions as they crossed the Atlantic. The trip was so harsh that at least one young girl reportedly did not survive. When the Clotilda finally arrived in Alabama, the captives were quickly offloaded and secretly dispersed to avoid detection. Knowing full well that what they had done was illegal, Meir and his associates burned and sank the ship in a remote part of the Mobile River to destroy any evidence of their crime. For over a century, the wreck remained hidden, its exact location lost to time. Many people in the area knew the story, but without physical proof, it was often treated as more of a legend than a confirmed piece of history. That changed in 2019 when a team of researchers, historians, and archaeologists from the Alabama Historical Commission and Search Inc. launched a full-scale search. After an intense year-long investigation, they finally found what was left of the Clotilda buried in the muddy waters of the Mobile River. The ship was in rough shape, having been deliberately burned before it was sunk. Most of it had been destroyed, and whatever was left was covered in silt and debris. While few artifacts could be recovered, the discovery of the wreck itself was enough to confirm what many had known all along. The Clotilda was real, and its story was not just a piece of local lore, but a critical chapter in American history. One of the most significant aspects of this discovery was its connection to Africatown, a community founded by survivors of the Clotilda who, after the Civil War, built a life for themselves near Mobile. Some lost histories are buried underwater, while others hide in plain sight, waiting to be rediscovered. Clifton Suspension Bridge Vaults. The Clifton Suspension Bridge is one of the most famous landmarks in Bristol, but hidden beneath its massive stone abutments is a secret that remained forgotten for over a century. In 2002, workers doing routine maintenance stumbled across a manhole cover that led to something unexpected. When they lifted it, they found themselves looking into a small brick chamber with an old coal stove sitting inside. That alone was strange enough, but as they explored further, they realized they had uncovered something much bigger. Beneath the Lee Woods Tower, hidden in the depths of the bridge, was a sprawling network of 12 enormous vaulted chambers. These underground spaces were not just some random hidden rooms. They were actually part of the original design of the bridge, created by the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. The idea was to make the massive stone abutments lighter while still keeping them strong enough to hold up the bridge. Brunel had planned everything down to the smallest detail, but after he died in 1859, the original plans for the Lee Woods abutment were lost. Without them, these vaults slipped into obscurity, forgotten as the years went by. When the workers first stepped inside, they found themselves surrounded by intricate brickwork, with some of the chambers stretching up into cathedral-like spaces with soaring ceilings. As they moved deeper, they discovered stalactites hanging from the ceilings, some of them reaching an incredible 23 feet in length. These had formed over the years due to water slowly seeping through the stone, leaving behind mineral deposits that built up over time. It was like stepping into a hidden underground world, frozen in time. The bridge itself had already been through plenty of struggles. Construction started in 1836, but faced so many delays and financial issues that it was not completed until 1864, 5 years after Brunel had died. The vaults were just another piece of the bridge's history that had been lost along the way. But after their rediscovery, they quickly became a point of fascination for engineers, historians, and anyone who loved a good hidden chamber story. Not all hidden vaults are buried deep underground. Some are tucked away beneath ancient mansions, waiting to be uncovered. Like the 1,200-year-old mansion vaults. In the middle of Israel's Negev desert, in the Bedouin town of Rahat, archaeologists made a discovery that revealed just how luxurious life could be over 1,000 years ago. Buried beneath layers of sand and time was a massive estate dating back to the early Islamic period, sometime around the 8th or 9th century. This was not just any old house. It was a mansion built for someone who lived in serious style, the kind of place that made it clear its owner was wealthy and powerful. The layout of the mansion was designed around a central courtyard, a classic setup for grand homes of the time. 4 wings extended from this open-air space, each packed with multiple rooms. One section stood out in particular, a stunning hallway paved with marble and lined with stone floors. The walls had once been decorated in vibrant colors, and even though time had worn them down, archaeologists could still see traces of their elaborate designs. The people who lived here clearly enjoyed the finer things. The floors and walls had been covered in colorful frescoes, and scattered among the ruins were shards of elegant glass serving dishes. These were not the kind of rough, everyday items you would expect to find in an ordinary home. These were the dining sets of someone who had the means to entertain guests in true luxury. But one of the most fascinating parts of this discovery was hidden underground. Beneath the estate, archaeologists found a series of stone vaults, revealing a level of architectural brilliance that was ahead of its time. These underground chambers served a very practical purpose. The Negev desert is no stranger to extreme heat, and back in those days, air conditioning was obviously not an option. Instead, the people who built this mansion relied on a much older and more reliable method, using the earth itself to stay cool. The stone vaults provided a naturally cooler environment, perfect for escaping the sweltering temperatures above ground. These underground spaces were not just for comfort, they were also used for storage, likely holding food and other goods that needed to be kept fresh. One of the vaulted rooms even had an opening leading to a cistern, giving the residents easy access to cool drinking water. This was a smart and efficient design, allowing them to make the most of the harsh desert environment without sacrificing comfort. Some vaults were built for luxury, while others held the secrets of ancient engineering, hidden for millennia. 3,800-year-old passageway and vault. In the Jezreel Valley of northern Israel, archaeologists uncovered something that had been hidden beneath the earth for nearly 4,000 years. Deep within the ruins of Tel Shimron, an ancient city that once stood along vital trade routes, they found a passageway and a vault from the Middle Bronze Age. This was no ordinary discovery. What they had stumbled upon was the oldest known example of a corbelled mud brick vault in the region, a structure that completely changed what experts thought they knew about early architecture in this part of the world. The discovery happened during the 2023 excavation season, a time when archaeologists were already sifting through the remains of Tel Shimron's past. The city had been an important place during the Bronze Age, showing up in Egyptian records and later in biblical and rabbinic texts. It was a hub of activity, a place where different cultures and civilizations crossed paths, trading goods, ideas, and technology. That made this vault even more exciting. It was proof that advanced architectural techniques from Mesopotamia had made their way into Canaan much earlier than anyone expected. At the heart of the find was the Corbelled Vault, an ingenious way of creating a ceiling by stacking bricks inward, forming a kind of false arch. This method was widely used in Mesopotamia, but no one had ever seen it in this part of the southern Levant before. It showed just how interconnected the ancient world really was. The people of Tel Shimron were not just isolated villagers building with whatever materials they had on hand. They were influenced by, and possibly even in contact with, some of the most advanced civilizations of their time. Connected to this vault was a long passageway built out of thousands of unfired mud bricks. Normally, a structure like this would have crumbled away over time, lost to the elements. But something unusual had happened here. Padmanabha Swami Temple Vaults. Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala, is home to one of the most mysterious and treasure-filled temples in the world. The Padmanabha Swami Temple is not just a place of worship. It is a vault of history, a legend come to life, and a jaw-dropping display of wealth that sat undisturbed for centuries. People had always whispered about what lay beneath its ancient floors, but for the longest time, no one really knew. It was just one of those stories that got passed around, something you might hear from an old storyteller in the market, but nothing anyone could prove. That all changed in the early 2000s when archaeologists started poking around. When they finally took a serious look at what was hiding underground, they were not prepared for what they found. Under the temple were 6 underground chambers labeled A to F, like something out of an adventure movie. It was not until 2011, when India's Supreme Court ordered 5 of them to be opened, that the world really sat up and paid attention. The moment those doors swung open, it was as if history itself had been frozen in time. Piles of gold coins, some from the Napoleonic era, some from the days when Roman merchants sailed to India in search of spices. A solid gold idol of Mahavishnu, standing 4 feet tall and covered in diamonds, looked like it belonged in some ancient epic. There was a throne made entirely of gold, built for the deity's idol, and an 18-foot-long golden chain that looked like it could have been worn by some mythical giant. There were coconut shells, but instead of being hollowed out for water, these were made completely of gold and studded with rubies and emeralds. Gold coins stacked together weighed hundreds of kilograms. It was a treasure hoard unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Historians say that this wealth was gathered over centuries, gifted by kings, traders, and devoted worshippers who sought blessings from Lord Vishnu. The temple itself is believed to date back to at least the 8th or 9th century, but its importance skyrocketed in the 18th century, thanks to King Martanda Varma of Travancore. This was a man who took his devotion to another level. He handed over his entire kingdom to Lord Vishnu and declared himself just a servant of the deity. That meant that technically, everything in Travancore belonged to the temple, which might explain why its vaults were so spectacularly well stocked. Not all treasure is hidden in temples. Sometimes it's buried in a field, waiting to be found. Great Pyramid of Cholula is definitely proof that history has some kind of sense of humor. I mean, the biggest pyramid on Earth was completely buried, and people just forgot it was there. For centuries, everyone thought it was just a hill. So naturally, when the Spanish arrived, they built a church, the Santuario de Nuestra Señora de los Remedios, right on top of it. I mean, of course they did. If there was one thing those conquistadors loved, it was taking over whatever they could. At first glance, the site looks like a regular hill with a beautiful church sitting on top. But beneath that hill is a structure so massive, it makes the Great Pyramid of Giza look small by comparison. The Pyramid of Cholula is the largest pyramid by volume, covering nearly 45 acres, with a base 4 times the size of Giza's. And yet, for centuries, it sat there, completely unnoticed. Even when locals started digging tunnels into it, they didn't realize what they were standing on. It wasn't until the early 20th century, when excavation efforts revealed endless layers of brick and stone, that people finally pieced it together. That hill was actually an ancient temple complex, built up over generations by the people of Cholula. Every time a ruler wanted to expand it, they just built on top of the existing structure, creating a pyramid so huge it eventually got swallowed by time. And, apparently, a whole lot of dirt. And honestly, I kinda get how this happened. If something's been sitting there long enough, blending into the landscape, people just stop questioning it. But the fact that the Spanish rolled in, saw this massive structure, and went, yeah, perfect church spot, is next-level irony. They thought they were stamping out the indigenous culture, when in reality, they were literally building on top of it. The thing about Karnak Temple is that you don't just walk into it, you get swallowed by it. It's 200 acres of ancient Egyptian flexing, built over nearly 2,000 years by pharaohs who clearly had something to prove. I mean, what were they even compensating for? Every new ruler wanted to leave their mark, and instead of, building a nice statue, they just kept adding to this temple until it became the biggest religious complex in history. That is commitment. If you were an ancient Egyptian king and you didn't add something to Karnak, did you even rule? The scale is ridiculous. The Great Hypostyle Hall alone has 134 columns, some towering 66 feet high, each carved with intricate hieroglyphs that still haven't faded after thousands of years. And these weren't just decorations. They were literal stone-carved flexes of wealth, devotion, and, let's be real, ego. The Sutton Hoo Treasure. In the summer of 1939, just before the world was about to be thrown into chaos with the start of World War II, something remarkable was happening in a quiet corner of Suffolk, England. A woman named Edith Pretty, who owned some land near the Deben estuary, had long suspected there was something unusual beneath the grassy mounds on her property. She invited a self-taught archaeologist named Basil Brown to take a closer look, and what he found turned out to be one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries in British history. As he began digging, he uncovered something unexpected. A pattern of iron rivets started to emerge from the soil, and as more of them appeared, it became clear they were part of a massive ship. The whole thing measured about 27 meters long and had been carefully buried centuries ago. Unlike other ship burials where the wood had rotted away entirely, this one had left a perfect imprint in the sand, almost like a ghost of the vessel that had once been there. This was not just any grave. This was the burial of someone important, possibly even a king. The grave was filled with treasures, objects that spoke of wealth, power, and craftsmanship that had survived since the early medieval period. Among the most famous finds was the now iconic Sutton Hoo helmet. When it was first found, it was in pieces, but once restored, it revealed an elaborate design with a full face mask and decorations that included images of boars. It was both a work of art and a powerful symbol of status. There were also gold and garnet shoulder clasps, a belt buckle decorated with intricate interlocking patterns, and a purse that still held 37 gold coins. Silver plates and bowls were found alongside them, and many of these were traced back to the Eastern Roman Empire, which hinted at long-distance trade and connections far beyond England. The weapons in the burial included a pattern-welded sword with a jeweled hilt and a shield that had to be reconstructed from fragments. But this wasn't just a warrior's tomb. Among the items was a lyre, a stringed instrument used in poetry and storytelling, suggesting that whoever was buried here was also connected to the artistic and cultural world of the time. The grave even contained rare organic materials like textiles, feathers, and fur. Normally, the acidic soil in England would have destroyed these over time, But in this case, traces of them remained, giving an unexpected glimpse into things like clothing and burial rituals. Do you think there are more treasures out there that we don't know about? Maybe there's more hidden from us than we know. There's a submarine named the Defender sitting at the bottom of Long Island. This is not some modern steel giant, not some Cold War relic. You see, this particular one has wheels, and for nearly 80 years, this thing was gone, lost beneath the waves. People assumed it was just another forgotten piece of maritime junk buried under a century of mud and bad memories. But then in 2023, a diver named Richard Simon and his team showed up. But they weren't hunting treasure. They weren't chasing myths. They just wanted to know if the stories were true. So they followed the clues. Old government records, scattered reports, whispers from local fishermen who swore they knew where the sub had gone down. And what they found was shocking. But I'll get back to that by the end of this video. This next particular case is the most important breakthrough since the Defender. The Nautilus submarine was so dangerous, even Napoleon rejected it. But its creator refused to back down, and that stubbornness sent it straight to the bottom. It's the year 1800. You're standing on the banks of the Seine River in France, watching a man climb into what looks like a floating coffin. The people are whispering. Some of them are just waiting for this thing to sink and take its inventor with it. But Robert Fulton? He's not laughing. Because in his mind, he's about to change the future of war forever. See, Fulton wasn't just building a boat. He was building an invisible weapon, a machine that could slip beneath the waves, sneak up on enemy ships, and blow them out of the water before anyone even knew what happened. And for the early 1800s, that idea wasn't just ambitious, it was insane. But Fulton did it anyway. He called it the Nautilus, 21 feet of copper and iron, stitched together by sheer stubbornness and a belief that the old ways of war were finished. Instead of sails, he gave it a hand-cranked propeller. Instead of cannons, he armed it with floating bombs, little copper cylinders packed with gunpowder and bad intentions. Fulton even figured out how to make his submarine dive and surface using a ballast system, which is wild when you remember people still thought balloons were cutting-edge technology back then. In the tests he performed, the Nautilus sank a small ship right there on the river. One day, he took his invention to Napoleon. Fulton thought that this was his big moment. But unfortunately, Napoleon thought it was too experimental and dangerous. And just like that, the dream ended right there. No government contracts, no fleets of stealth submarines, just a pile of scrap metal and an inventor with nowhere left to turn. So, in a fit of rage, Fulton dismantled the Nautilus with his own hands. The parts were lost in the water, but this time, the sea sent something back, and it was the U-534, a dangerous submarine from World War II that had been hidden under the ocean for decades. It was May 2nd, 1945. The war was ending, Germany was crumbling, but deep in the North Sea, one last submarine was still on patrol. The U-534, one of the long-range U-boats designed to stalk Allied convoys and tear the lifelines of Britain to shreds. But by 1945, the hunters had become the hunted. Allied ships didn't just defend themselves anymore. They hunted back, with radar, sonar, and depth charges that could turn steel into scrap in seconds. Still, the U-534 kept going. Whether out of duty, desperation, or denial, their crew pushed on into waters they knew they might never leave. And then the sky fell when the British aircraft spotted her. And just moments later, the sea was shaking. Bombs rained down, explosions roared through the water. And inside the sub, the men were scrambling for their lives. Keep in mind, these were just boys who were simply doing what their nation asked them to do. But as the U-534 slipped beneath the surface, the war above raged on without her. But the sea doesn't care how close you are. It takes what it takes. And unfortunately, It took down the biggest tour underwater by arguably the worst submarine in history. There's something poetic about a submarine built to visit a wreck becoming one itself. But the deeper you go into the Titan story, the stranger it gets. And not just because of the carbon fiber or the billionaires on board. What really sticks with me is this quiet, nagging thought that nobody seems to ask. Why did we ever think this was going to work? We're talking about a capsule, bolted shut from the outside, dropping into a part of the planet less explored than Mars, using materials that engineers had been side-eyeing for years. And I can't stop wondering, did Titan already know it was going to fail? What if that fatal flaw wasn't born on that last descent? What if it had been there for months, years? Here's where it really gets eerie. The Titan didn't just want to reach the Titanic. It wanted to offer tours repeatedly for profit. Human beings paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to roll the dice against physics itself. Almost like we forgot what happened to the ship it was visiting. Titan is now part of the very legend it was built to chase. But even Titan's nothing compared to the legendary U-864's demise. Somewhere in the freezing black waters off Norway, there's a metal coffin packed with secrets. That submarine was U-864, a German U-boat built for silence, speed, and smuggling, designed not just to fight, but to disappear. Some say it was carrying advanced weaponry. Others claim that it had just about enough mercury to build an entire generation of bombs. But whatever she carried, one thing's for certain. The U-864 was never meant to be found. It's early 1945. The war is almost over, and Germany is running out of cards to play. The U-864 is dispatched on a desperate mission to sneak her cargo across the world to Japan. Problem is, the British intelligence has been listening, watching, waiting. They know she's out there, and they send the HMS Venturer to stop her. Now, this isn't some Hollywood showdown on the surface. This is a duel in the dark. Two submarines, both submerged and deadly. But when the moment came, the Venturer didn't fire one torpedo. She fired four. Not at a target it could see, but at where it thought the U-864 would be in the future. And in an instant, U-864's mission ended with a sound no human ears would ever hear. Crushed under the weight of the sea, a steel body folding in on itself like paper. But here's the part I can't shake. Why was Germany willing to risk so much so late in the war? What was really inside U-864? And why, decades later, are there still debates about whether to raise her or leave her buried? Either way, things took a turn for the worse with submarine U-869, since the cause of her destruction was her own self. U-869 was one of Germany's biggest late-war gambles. A high-tech predator designed to hunt across the Atlantic. Sleek, fast, deadly. But by the time she set off on what would become her final patrol in early 1945, the tides had already turned. The Allies owned the skies. They owned the sea. And the once feared U-boats became steel coffins waiting for a reason. But U-869 pressed on. Some say she was headed to disrupt American shipping on the East Coast. Others claim she got lost, or her mission was changed mid-patrol. Either way, she ended up off the Jersey Shore in enemy waters, running silent. And here's where things get really interesting, because U-869 wasn't in great shape. The diesel-electric engine was acting up. Finally, it received a new mission, Operation Regenbogen. It was the last bitter command from a dying regime. If you're going down, take yourself with you. Don't give the Allies the satisfaction of capturing an intact U-boat. Destroy it, sink it, scuttle the whole thing. So, what really happened that night? Some believe the crew followed their orders to the letter, planted charges, set the fuses, sent one last radio message into the void to confirm they were pulling the plug on their own story. Maybe they knew the engines weren't going to get them home. Maybe the ocean had already decided for them. But others aren't so sure. because evidence on the wreck tells a slightly different tale. Signs of damage that look less like a controlled scuttling and more like a fight. Maybe they were caught in the act. Maybe they tried to escape. Maybe the final moments were chaos instead of control. And just maybe, it took 2 wars to take down 2 of the most lethal submarines ever. Take UB-110 and U-843, 2 submarines, 2 different wars, 2 final dives that ended almost the same way, smashed apart by pressure and violence, left to rust in the dark. But the more you dig into their stories, the more you start to wonder, was it really the enemy that killed them? Or did the water just finish what time had already started? Let's start with UB-110. This was a World War I machine, fresh out of the shipyard with all the fancy upgrades of its era. A pressure hull designed to hold the weight of the ocean itself. Strong, advanced, ready for anything. Until it wasn't. In the final months of the war, UB-110 ran into trouble. Depth charges, artillery fire, chaos raining from above. The hull was supposed to take it. That was the whole point. But pressure is a patient killer. It doesn't need an opening. Once the first drop of water gets in, that's it. The rest is inevitable. But then there's U-843. By the time World War II rolled around, submarine design had leveled up. Engineers thought they'd worked out the kinks that doomed boats like UB-110. They built U-843 to be sleek and deadly, like a ghost slipping through the Atlantic. But ghosts don't dodge shockwaves. On patrol, somewhere in the cold dark, Allied depth charges found her. Again, it wasn't just the explosion. It was the pressure. The way the force rippled through the water, hunting for the soft spot. And the ocean took over from there. But what happens when a submarine trips on a mine under the sea? It's hard to imagine a worse way to go than drifting blind through a minefield. That was the reality for UB-29, a German submarine sent out in the summer of 1917 with one job: patrol enemy waters. Simple enough on paper, but in practice, it meant threading a metal coffin through invisible death traps, hoping the ocean didn't swallow you whole before the enemy even had the chance. Mines were the real sea monsters back then. You couldn't see them. You couldn't hear them. Just these silent floating killers anchored to the sea floor, waiting patiently for someone to make a mistake. And UB-29 ended up making the most tragic one. The sub slipped into a narrow corridor, surrounded on both sides by explosives carefully placed by Allied forces. They just made one wrong turn, and the sub exploded. Within minutes, the submarine was gone, dragging its crew to the bottom. And that should have been the end of it. But decades later, people found her. Archaeologists scanning the seafloor came across the wreck, nearly hidden beneath layers of silt. But when divers got close enough, they could see the story written in twisted metal. Most submarines end their story at the bottom of the ocean, but not the U-995. The U-995 somehow slipped through the cracks of history, the kind of U-boat that probably should have been scrap metal by now. But instead, you can go visit her. Walk her narrow halls, smell the rust, feel the claustrophobia creep in. It was May 1944. The U-995's out in the freezing North Atlantic, minding her own business, when a Canadian Sunderland flying boat spots her. Machine guns light up the sky. Bullets rip into the metal. 5 men go down. The sub takes damage, but not enough to kill her, but enough to make the whole crew wonder if this is the moment the sea finally gets what it's been waiting for. However, they patched her up and they limped back to safety. But then, 2 months later, the RAF's B-24 Liberator shows up. It gets face-to-face with the U-995. When the explosions hit, oil spills out, just a slick black ribbon across the water saying, "Hey, we're over here if anyone else wants a shot." And somewhere inside that chaos, they find out the mounting on one of the radio antennas is leaking. which, if you're not a submarine nerd, is basically like discovering your parachute has a hole halfway through your skydive. But somehow, they managed to keep her afloat. That's the thing about U-995. She's not famous because of some record-breaking kill count. She's not a legend because of a dramatic last stand. She's famous because she just wouldn't die. But then, right as the war ends and every other U-boat gets scuttled, bombed, or rusted into oblivion, the British take her. Then the Norwegians borrowed her for a while, renamed her to Cora. And finally, in 1965, after 2 decades of somehow still existing, she gets shipped back to Germany. They clean her up, slap some fresh paint on, and park her in Le Beau, where you can now walk through a submarine that honestly feels like it survived by sheer force of will. On the other hand, the largest submarine ever built didn't go out in a blaze of glory. The I-400 was quietly, deliberately erased. See, back in World War II, Japan came up with this absolutely wild idea. What if, they thought, we built a submarine, but made it an aircraft carrier? And they actually did it. The I-400 wasn't just big, it was absurd, nearly twice the length of anything else out there. A steel leviathan designed to creep through the ocean, pop up out of nowhere, and launch planes. Yes, actual, full-sized planes, 3 of them, tucked into a watertight hangar like some kind of secret underwater airbase. The plan was to sneak across the Pacific, surface near the Panama Canal, launch a surprise airstrike to choke off Allied shipping. But that's what desperation looks like in the final years of a losing war. The I-400 was finished in late 1944. But by then, Japan was already running out of time. The Allies were closing in, cities were burning, supplies were vanishing. And these monstrous, high-tech submarines? They suddenly felt a bit late to the party. So instead of rewriting history with some world-shattering attack, the I-400 spent most of its life waiting. And then, just like that, the war ended. And here's where things get really interesting. The Americans show up, they take one look at this beast of a submarine, and immediately realize, if we think this is cool, the Soviets are going to lose their minds. Because keep in mind, this is the start of Cold War vibes. Nobody wants cutting-edge military tech drifting into the wrong hands. So the US Navy cooked up a plan Operation Road's End. The goal was simple: sink every single advanced Japanese submarine before anyone else can touch them, only to witness the very same thing happening to the USS Greyback. This was a submarine built for chaos, for slipping into enemy waters in the dead of night, launching torpedoes, and disappearing before anyone knew what hit them. Fast, sharp, deadly, a shadow with teeth. Launched in the early 1940s, Greyback was part of that generation of submarines that lived on a knife's edge. One wrong turn, one lucky enemy plane, one depth charge, and it's game over. But Greyback kept going, patrol after patrol, dodging bombers, skirting through minefields, fighting in a war where, let's be honest, submarines didn't exactly have the longest life expectancy. And somehow, she made it through. No dramatic final battle, no tragic "lost with all hands" telegram. Just a slow fade into the background, like the hero in the movie who quietly walks off into the sunset while the credits roll. Because when the war ended, everything changed. Suddenly, the Navy didn't need as many diesel-electric subs anymore. The world was shifting into the nuclear age. Faster, bigger, deadlier. Machines that could stay underwater for months without ever coming up for air. And that left boats like Greyback feeling outdated. But the same can't be said for a submarine that's still carrying the bodies of 71 men underwater. Off the coast of Sardinia, 80 meters down, there's a submarine sitting in the dark, still holding the bodies of 71 men who never came home. She was called the HMSP 311. Her real name was supposed to be Tutankhamun, like the pharaoh. The one buried in gold, locked away in a tomb no one was meant to find. which is fitting because that's exactly what she became. Back in December 1942, P-311 left Malta on a secret mission. Operation Principle. The goal was to sneak into Sardinia's waters and take out a pair of Italian warships. No one was supposed to see them coming. But then something strange happened. She sent her last signal on New Year's Eve, and after that, she just vanished. No distress call, no survivors. For years, nobody really knew what happened. The waters around Sardinia were crawling with mines. Big, floating bombs waiting for unlucky ships to bump into them. It made sense, but without proof, it was just another wartime mystery until 2016, when a diver named Massimo Bondoni was exploring off the coast of Tavalara when, out of nowhere, he found her sitting quietly on the seafloor. And here's the part that still gives me chills. She wasn't obliterated. This wasn't some twisted heap of wreckage. The mine hit the bow, just enough damage to lock her shut, not enough to break her apart. Which means the crew inside were still alive, at least for a little while. But somewhere beneath the sunlit waves of the Aegean Sea, there's a graveyard no one really talks about. For 81 years, HMS Trooper sat quietly down there. No headlines, no search parties, a forgotten shadow on the ocean floor. Until now. A guy named Kostas Thoktaridis, leading a team from Planet Blue, finally found her. Imagine that. Decades of nothing. Then suddenly, there she is. Broken. Still. Waiting. But to really feel this story, you have to rewind. It's October 1943. World War II is burning through the world. Submarines like Trooper, they're the ghosts of the sea, sliding beneath the waves, unseen, unheard, slipping through enemy waters like sharks with steel skin. Their job was simple but impossible. Get in, disrupt everything, and get out alive. But Trooper never got out. She left on patrol, tasked with guarding key sea lanes and spying on German movements. 1 minute she was there, the next minute she was gone. And for decades, nobody knew what happened. People guessed, sure, mines, enemy ships, mechanical failure. But there was no wreck, no proof, just a lot of empty water and a list of names that never made it home. But when Kostas and his team finally found her, the mystery cracked open. Trooper wasn't just resting peacefully on the seabed. She was torn into 3 huge pieces, like something grabbed her and snapped her apart. Turns out that something was likely a German mine. One moment of bad luck in a sea full of invisible killers. This wasn't a slow disaster. There wasn't time to react, to fight, to fix it. The mine hit. The explosion ripped through the hull. 64 men gone in an instant. It's brutal, but also weirdly beautiful. Because now, after all this time, we finally know where they are. I always think about what those last moments must have been like. Did anyone realize? Was it over before they knew it started? Maybe that's the only mercy in a story like this. Because somewhere off the coast of Connecticut, beneath the gray, restless waves of Long Island Sound, sleeps a submarine with wheels. This isn't science fiction. This is the Defender, built all the way back in 1907. An experimental underwater machine straight out of the fever dream of a man named Simon Lake, a guy who looked at the ocean floor and thought, why swim when you can drive? For decades, the locals swapped rumors about her. An underwater car, a ghost of early engineering rusting away beneath the tides. But nobody really knew if she was still down there, until Richard Simon and his dive team from Shoreline Diving finally found her. And what they found was like stumbling onto the remains of some forgotten steampunk future. This was a 92-foot-long submarine resting quietly on the seabed, more than 75 years after someone decided her time was up and scuttled her for good. But let's back up for a second. At the start of the 20th century, submarines were barely past the drawing board. The world was still figuring out if humans were supposed to be down there at all. And Simon Lake? He wasn't just building subs. He was dreaming up underwater contraptions with airlocks and mechanical arms, and yes, actual wheels meant to let the vessel roll along the ocean floor like some metal beetle creeping through the dark. The Defender was his shot at a US Navy contract, a proof of concept, a gamble. She even had a lockout chamber designed so divers could leave the sub while underwater, a feature way ahead of its time. But the Navy weren't sold. Other subs got sleeker, deadlier, quieter. The Defender became a relic before she ever really got her moment. Eventually, they scuttled her. Just sank her right there in the Sound. And that should have been the end. Except it wasn't. Because now, over a century after her maiden dive, people are talking about the Defender again. In a way, the Defender did exactly what her name promised. She defended the idea that invention is supposed to be weird, ambitious, maybe even a little impractical. And now, she's still down there moving, proving that sometimes the things we leave behind don't disappear. They just wait for us to remember. The story of the Kaz-2 is one of those real-life mysteries that just messes with your head. I mean, how does a boat just show up, perfectly intact, with no one on board? No signs of struggle, no distress calls, just gone. It's like the Twilight Zone or something out here. So here's what happened. In April 2007, three friends, Derek Batten and brothers Peter and James Tunstead, set off from Airlie Beach, Australia, on what was supposed to be a dream sailing trip along the coast. They had experience, they had a solid catamaran, and they had no reason to think anything would go wrong. But just 3 days later, their boat, the Kaz-2, was spotted drifting near the Great Barrier Reef. When authorities boarded, what they found was downright eerie. The engine was running, a laptop was open, a half-drunk cup of coffee sat on the table. Fishing lines were still cast out into the water. It was like the crew had just stepped away for a second, but they hadn't. They were gone, and they were never seen again. Now, I don't know about you, but my brain immediately starts spinning in situations like this. Pirates, a rogue wave, a sea monster. Okay, maybe not a sea monster, but you get the idea. The official theory is that one of the guys was trying to free a tangled fishing line, maybe slipped overboard, and the others, in a frantic attempt to save him, got swept away one by one. But there's a problem with that. These guys weren't amateurs. They knew better than to all jump in without a safety line. And the fact that nobody made a distress call, that just adds another layer of weirdness. Some folks think freak weather played a role. There were reports of sudden strong winds that day, and maybe the boat lurched at just the wrong moment. 1 second they were all on deck, and the next, the ocean had swallowed them up. But the strangest thing? The Kaz-2 itself was completely fine. No damage, no sign of panic, just an empty boat floating silently, as if nothing had happened. To this day, no one really knows what went down on the Kaz-2. All I know is, if I ever set sail, I'm keeping my life vest on and my radio close, because the ocean doesn't give second chances. Up next, the time a massive cruise just randomly lost power. Cruise ships are supposed to glide through the ocean like floating hotels, not get stuck like a beached whale. But that's exactly what happened to the Norwegian Dawn near Bermuda, and I can only imagine the uh-oh moment on board when it hit the channel bed. So here's the deal. This massive cruise ship, packed with over 3,700 people, was just leaving King's Wharf when it suddenly lost power. No power meant no propulsion, and without that, the ship wasn't going anywhere. Instead, it drifted straight into the seabed. I don't know about you, but if I were on board, I'd be clutching my drink and wondering if I'd accidentally booked the Titanic experience. Like, look at this footage. These people were freaking out and praying to every god known to man. No thanks. Luckily though, no one was hurt, and the ship wasn't taking on water, so the empath in you can chill out now. Basically, according to the Norwegian cruise line, the power outage was only temporary. But by then, the damage had been done. Literally, the ship was stuck. Crew members had to hop into a small boat to check things out, while passengers stayed relatively calm. Which, let's be honest, probably means nervously downing pina coladas at the bar. Authorities confirmed that the Norwegian Dawn was stable, and the water around it wasn't polluted, so at least there wasn't an environmental disaster. But the big question was, now what? Would the ship continue its journey, or would thousands of passengers need to figure out a plan B? For a ship that's nearly 1,000 feet long and weighs 92,000 tons, being grounded in the middle of paradise wasn't exactly part of the itinerary. It's one thing to enjoy a tropical cruise. It's another to be parked in the ocean with no way out. Now, let's step into the world of the uber-rich and celebrate their losses. Can you believe this ship was shipping nearly 4,000 luxury cars across the ocean, only to have the whole thing go up in flames? That's exactly what happened to the Felicity Ace, a massive cargo ship that turned into a floating inferno in February 2022. If I were one of the folks waiting for my brand new Porsche or Bentley, I'd probably still be crying. So, here's how it all went down. The Felicity Ace was cruising across the Atlantic, carrying a jaw-dropping lineup of high-end cars, Porsches, Bentleys, Audis, even some Lamborghinis. This wasn't just any shipment. We're talking millions of dollars in vehicles making their way from Germany to the US. But on February 16th, disaster struck. A fire broke out somewhere on board. And trust me, a fire on a cargo ship is pretty much a worst-case scenario. Once the flames took hold, it became clear that this wasn't going to be an easy fix. The crew, thankfully, was safely evacuated, but the ship was left to drift, burning in the middle of the ocean. For days, fireboats and rescue teams tried to get things under control, but with so many electric vehicles on board, the lithium-ion batteries just kept the fire going. If you've ever seen a battery fire, you know those things don't go out easily. By February 25th, the Felicity Ace was officially doomed. It was abandoned and left smoldering until, finally, on March 1st, it sank into the depths of the Atlantic, taking every last luxury car with it. Gone. Just like that. Millions of dollars in high-end vehicles now resting on the ocean floor, probably making some fish feel really fancy. And just to twist the knife a little more, a year later, car prices were still sky-high, partly thanks to this disaster. So if you were wondering why that Porsche you wanted was ridiculously expensive, well, blame the Felicity Ace. Yeah, I was pissed when I found out too. Not that I can even afford one. If there's one thing I never expected to lose, it's an entire ship. But that's somehow what happened with the Lyubov Orlova, a Soviet-era cruise liner turned ghost ship that just vanished. And to make things even weirder, people think it might have been crawling with cannibal rats. Yeah, you heard that right. This all started back in 2010, when the Lyubov Orlova, once a proud Arctic cruise ship, ended up abandoned in Canada. The ship had been seized in St. John's, Newfoundland, after its owners couldn't pay their debts. So there it sat, rusting away at the dock for 2 years, probably wondering what it did to deserve such a fate. Then in 2013, someone had the bright idea to tow it out to sea and scrap it. Simple enough, right? I thought the same. Well, apparently not really. Because the second the Lyubov Orlova was on its way, the tow line snapped. Just like that, it was adrift, totally out of control in the North Atlantic. The Canadian government basically shrugged and said, "Not our problem," since it was now in international waters. And so, the Lyubov Orlova was left to do whatever abandoned ships do, float aimlessly and freak everyone out if they dare to set sail on their private yacht. For a while, satellite images kept spotting it drifting, a massive rust bucket just wandering the ocean. But then, poof, it disappeared. No wreckage, no distress signals, nothing. Some say it eventually sank, but no one actually knows. And that's where the whole cannibal rat thing comes in. People started speculating that if the ship was still out there, it might be home to a colony of rats, surviving by, well, eating each other. I can't decide if that's terrifying or just plain disgusting. To this day, the Lyubov Orlova has never been officially found. Maybe it's at the bottom of the ocean, or maybe it's still drifting somewhere, waiting to crash onto some unsuspecting shore. And if it ever does, you can bet I'll be watching from a safe distance, just in case those rats have developed a taste for something other than each other. Now let's circle to the year we got our coveted COVID-19 pandemic. In February 2020, a 44-year-old ghost ship, the MV Alta, just washed up near Ballycotton, Ireland, after floating around the Atlantic for nearly a year and a half with nobody on board. No crew, no distress signals, no explanation, just this eerie, rusting hulk appearing out of nowhere, like something straight out of a horror movie. Turns out, this ship had been abandoned way back in 2018, after breaking down in the middle of the ocean. The U.S. Coast Guard rescued the 10 crew members, leaving the vessel to drift aimlessly. And drift it did. The only time anyone spotted it was in 2019 near Bermuda, when the British Royal Navy randomly came across it. But no one bothered to recover it, so it just kept floating. For months. Then, in 2020, a massive storm smashed it into the Irish coastline, where it finally ran aground. Authorities were stunned. I mean, obviously, what else would they be? This wasn't just some forgotten fishing boat. This thing had changed names and flags so many times that people started suspecting it had been used for shady dealings. Smuggling? Illegal operations? Who knows? Even its tracking system, the AIS, had been turned on and off at random intervals, which is a classic trick used by smugglers. And yet, no one stepped forward to claim it. With no owner, the Irish government had no choice but to take over under the Salvage and Wreck Act of 1993. They sent teams in to check for environmental risks and found 62 barrels of oil still on board, which were quickly removed by helicopter before anything disastrous could happen. They also sealed off the area. But let's be real, people couldn't resist sneaking up to see the ghost ship for themselves. By late 2020, storms had beaten the wreck even further, raising concerns it might break apart. Cork County Council debated removing it, but it was expensive and risky. By 2023, storms had finally split the ship in half, and officials decided it was safer to leave it where it was, rather than risk a dangerous removal. So now, what's left of the Alta just sits there, slowly disappearing into the sea. One of the strangest maritime mysteries I've ever heard of. Now a somewhat heartwarming ocean story to top off all the sad and horrible ones. A family stranded on a broken-down sailboat with a sick baby had to be rescued by the U.S. Navy and Air National Guard in an operation that made global headlines 11 years ago. This is the story of the Kaufman family back in April 2014. And honestly, it's the kind of thing that makes you wonder if the ocean just has a personal vendetta against some people. So Charlotte and Eric Kaufman, a couple from California, decide they're going to sail around the world with their 2 little daughters, 3-year-old Cora and 1-year-old Lyra. Sounds like a dream, right? Sunsets on the open sea, dolphins swimming alongside the boat, that kind of thing. Well, not so fast. 2 weeks into their journey, they're already 900 miles off the coast of Mexico when things start going downhill fast. First, their boat, the Rebel Heart, starts having mechanical problems. Not ideal when you're in the middle of nowhere. But the real nightmare? Baby Lyra gets seriously sick. High fever, strange rash. Just all around bad news. Out at sea, with no doctor, no hospital, and their boat barely holding together. They're completely stuck. That's when they send out a distress signal. And let me tell you, when the U.S. military decides to show up, they don't mess around. A California Air National Guard team literally parachutes into the ocean to reach them. like actual Navy SEAL movie-level stuff. They stabilize Lyra while waiting for backup, and soon enough, a full-on Navy warship, the USS Vandegrift, shows up to rescue them. The Kaufmans and their kids are lifted off the sinking boat, and just like that, their dream voyage is over. Sadly, their beloved rebel heart left to sink into the Pacific. Years of planning, their floating home, just gone. Of course, once the story hit the news, everyone had an opinion. Some people felt bad for them. Others absolutely ripped them apart, calling them reckless for bringing babies on such a risky trip. The Kaufmans defended themselves, saying they were experienced sailors. But let's be real, this was not how they imagined their journey going. In the end, they made it back to California, shaken but safe. And now their experience makes for a great story. Worked out for me. So, which of these sea disasters freaked you out the most? Are you a frequent sailor? Let me know in the comments if you've had any crazy experiences just like these.